Okay, so we're all just swimming in information these days, aren't we?
Absolutely. Feeds, articles, data pouring in, it's constant.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, how do you even figure out what actually matters? What to
Mm.
focus on? Are you even, making progress towards your goals with all that noise?
That's the big question, really, for, well, anyone trying to get something done. Running a company, leading a team, heck, even just finishing a big personal project, information overload, it can just stop you in your tracks.
Totally. And that's why we're doing this deep dive today. We want to look at a system that's specifically designed to cut through that kind of, well, complexity.
Like a shortcut, almost.
Exactly. A shortcut to being not just informed, but more importantly, well-directed. We're talking about objectives and key results,
Yeah.
OKRs.
OKRs, they're at heart a goal-setting framework. But as we'll get into, it's really a lot more than just writing down some goals.
Yeah, it's more like a whole methodology, isn't it? Helping individuals, teams, whole companies align what they're doing and actually measure if it's working with, like, clarity.
Clarity and impact, that's the goal.
And for this deep dive, our main source is John Doerr's book, Measure What Matters. He really lays out how this system, which sounds simple on the surface,
Deceptively simple, maybe?
yeah, maybe, how it fueled massive success at places like Google, obviously, but also how it drove impact in, well, some pretty unexpected places too, like Bono's One campaign or the Gates Foundation.
Right. So our mission today is really to pull out the core ideas, the absolute essential principles, and the stories that really show them in action.
We want you to walk away understanding what OKRs are, fundamentally, and crucially, why they've worked so well for so many different kinds of organizations.
And, even though it sounds straightforward, set goals, measure them. There are some genuinely surprising bits, maybe even some counterintuitive aspects to how OKRs actually unlock such powerful results.
Okay, let's dig in then. What are OKRs at the most basic level?
All right, so fundamentally, the OKR framework, it just has two main parts, simple structure.
First, there's the objective. That's the what, right? What you're aiming to achieve.
That's it, the objective. It needs to be significant, something concrete, action-oriented, and ideally something that gets people fired up, inspirational.
Doerr calls it a vaccine against fuzzy thinking. I like that.
It's a great phrase. It forces clarity. So instead of something vague like, let's improve sales.
Got to be sharper. Like, successfully launch our new enterprise sales program in Q3. Something specific.
Exactly. That's the destination, stated clearly. And then the second part, the key results. These are the how.
How you're actually going to get to that objective.
Right. They're the milestones, the measurable proof that you're making progress.
And this is where it gets really rigorous, isn't it? The key results, they have to be specific, time-bound, challenging, but, actually doable.
And absolutely measurable, verifiable, no wiggle room.
Like that point from Marissa Mayer at Google.
Oh, yeah, that's classic. It's not a key result unless it has a number. Simple as that.
Either hit the number or you don't. Black and white.
That clarity is key. It removes all the ambiguity about whether you actually achieved it.
So if the objective is the destination on the map, the key results are like the specific, measurable points along the route that prove you're actually heading the right way.
Perfectly put. And the connection between them, it's non-negotiable. If you achieve all the key results you set for an objective.
Then the objective has to be achieved, by definition.
Exactly. If that link isn't there, if you can hit all your KRs and still miss the objective, then, well, you didn't set up your OKR properly in the first place. It really forces you to think through the how.
Makes you double check if the actions you're planning truly lead to the outcome you want. It's quite demanding, actually.
It is. And there's that core phrase that captures the relationship, right, from Intel days.
Objective as measured by key results.
That exact phrasing, as measured by, was deliberately baked into Intel's OKRs. Bill Davidow pushed for it. It's the glue, explicitly linking the goal to the quantifiable steps, no doubt for anyone reading it.
Okay, so Google made OKRs famous, but you mentioned Intel. This system has deeper roots then. Where did it actually start?
Yeah, we can trace the lineage back, way back actually, to the 1950s, to Peter Drucker.
Ah, the management guru.
The father of modern management, many would say. He introduced something called management by objectives and self-control, MBOs.
MBOs, okay. Sounds similar, but maybe not quite the same thing.
Kind of a precursor. Drucker was pushing for results-driven management, and critically, he advocated for involving subordinates in setting their own goals. That was a big deal back then, compared to the usual top-down command and control style.
But the book notes Drucker himself wasn't entirely happy with how MBOs turned out in practice. What were the problems?
Well, MBOs often became kind of bureaucratic,
Mm.
too rigid. They usually only got updated once a year, which is just too slow in many cases.
Right. And they stayed within departments, siloed.
Yeah, often siloed. And maybe the biggest issue, they were frequently tied directly to bonuses and raises.
Ah, okay. So if missing your goal hurts your paycheck.
You're going to set safe goals, right? You become risk averse. You don't aim high. You aim for what you know you can hit. It kind of defeats the purpose of stretching.
That makes total sense. Incentivizes playing it safe. So MBOs had limitations. Then comes Andy Grove at Intel in the 70s.
Andy Grove, the father of OKRs. He built on Drucker's ideas, but took them in a much more dynamic direction. Grove was obsessed with achievement orientation.
What does that mean exactly?
He famously said something like, "It almost doesn't matter what you know. It's what you can do and actually accomplish. Knowing stuff is fine, but making an impact doing things, that's what counts."
Wow. Powerful distinction.
Ah.
From knowing to doing. So how did he take MBOs and morph them into OKRs? What were the key changes?
Several really crucial ones. MBOs often focus just on the what. Grove insisted you had to define both the what's the objective and the how the key results. Very specific.
Okay, that's fundamental. What else?
He massively shortened the cycle. MBOs were typically annual. Grove pushed OKRs down to quarterly, sometimes even monthly reviews.
Much faster feedback loop then. Ability to adapt.
Exactly. And then there's transparency. This was huge. MBOs were often private, kept between a manager and employee. Grove made Intel's OKRs public. Everyone's. From the CEO down.
Whoa. Okay, that's a massive cultural shift. Everyone can see everyone else's goals.
Yep, radical transparency. He also flipped the goal-setting flow. MBOs were usually strictly top-down. Grove aimed for about half of OKRs to bubble up from the bottom or sideways between teams.
Giving people more ownership, letting them define how they contribute.
Absolutely. Fosters innovation and buy-in. And maybe the most critical change. He largely divorced OKRs from compensation.
Breaking that link we just talked about.
Exactly. This freed people up. It allowed them to set truly ambitious goals, stretch goals, moonshots even, without that fear of, oh no, if I only hit 70%, my bonus is gone. It fostered aspiration, not just meeting the minimum.
Okay, those changes, the how, the faster cycle, transparency, bottom-up input, decoupling from pay, they sound like they completely re-engineered the system, made it way more dynamic, visible, motivating.
Totally transformed it.
So Grove pioneers this at Intel. How does it make the leap to Google? That's where John Doerr comes in.
That's the connection.
Yeah.
John Doerr, he was an engineer at Intel, learned the system firsthand from Grove and another key figure, Jim Lally. He saw it work. He then took it to Sun Microsystems, implemented it successfully there.
And then he invested in Google early on.
Very early. 1999. Google was this tiny, hyper-ambitious startup. You know, brilliant founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, but still figuring out how to actually run and scale a company.
Right. Huge vision, organize the world's information, but probably not a ton of formal management structure yet.
Pretty much. Doerr saw that incredible ambition, but he also saw the massive execution challenge. His mantra was, ideas are easy, execution is everything.
And he thought OKRs were the tool for that execution.
He knew they were. So he brought the idea to Google's very first office, the one with the ping pong table boardroom.
The legendary ping pong table.
That's the place. Doerr literally gave his OKR presentation right there to Larry, Sergey, and maybe 30 other early Googlers. And get this.
Yeah.
He structured his pitch using OKRs. His objective for the meeting itself was something like finish on time, create some sample OKRs with them during the pitch, and get them to agree to try it for a quarter.
That's brilliant. Using OKRs to pitch OKRs, some meta.
Totally. And it worked. Sergey Brin reportedly said something like, we need an organizing principle. This might as well be it.
Wow. Just like that.
Pretty much. And Larry Page became a huge champion. He later credited OKRs directly with helping Google achieve that famous 10x growth repeatedly, said it made their crazy mission feel achievable, kept the company laser focused.
And it probably meshed well with Google's early culture, right?
Yeah.
Data-driven, transparent.
Absolutely. It fit right in. Apparently, in the early days, Larry Page would personally scrutinize and debate the leadership team's OKRs at the start of every single quarter, really modeling it from the top.
That level of leadership involvement is key.
Crucial. And Google stuck with them. The source credits their sustained use of OKRs as a major factor in huge successes. Search, obviously, but also Chrome, Android, getting YouTube to 1 billion users, even fixing major technical issues like the code yellow latency crisis, and supporting things like 20% time.
That's quite a testament. Okay, that history is fascinating. To really see OKRs in action, though, let's talk about that classic Intel story, Operation Crush.
Ah, Operation Crush. Yeah, the book presents this as like the textbook example of OKRs driving rapid, coordinated execution, especially when your back's against the wall.
What was the crisis Intel was facing? What was the wall?
This was late 70s. Motorola had launched a new microprocessor that was, frankly, faster than Intel's flagship ADU-86 chip. It was a serious threat. Bill David Dow, who led Crush, called it an existential threat to Intel's core business.
Okay, so high stakes. Their market leadership was really threatened. How did they react? Where did OKRs fit in?
Well, it started with a desperate telex, remember those? From a sales guy, basically sounding the alarm. Within a week, top brass met. A week later, a task force was formed. Jim Lally, the marketing manager, apparently set the tone with a very direct rallying cry.
Which was...
Have to crush the ficking bastards.
Okay, so definitely set a clear objective there. Was the plan just to rush out a faster chip?
Surprisingly, no. That's what's interesting. The source says they didn't really change the product much initially. The strategy was bigger. It was about changing the terms of engagement in the market.
What does that mean?
It meant a complete overhaul of their marketing and sales approach. Instead of just competing on raw speed or technical specs, they started selling the whole package. Long-term value, the system, service, support. And they shifted who they sold to targeting CEOs and high-level decision makers, not just the programmers using the chip.
That's a much broader, more complex strategy than just a product fix. How did OKRs help translate that into action across the whole company?
That's where the OKR cascade was absolutely vital. They broke down the counteroffensive strategy into 9 key parts. Those became the company-level key results.
Okay.
And then, critically, those KRs were cascaded down into the trenches. Every department, every team, down to individual engineers, set their own OKRs that clearly supported those top-level company goals.
Can you give an example? Like, how did it link up?
Sure. So the top-level Intel corporate objective might have been something like, establish the 8086 as the highest performance 16-bit microprocessor family.
Got it. Big goal.
One of its key results for, say, Q2 of 1980 was super specific. Get the 8 MHz version of the 8086 into production by June 15th.
Okay, concrete deadline, measurable output. How does an engineering team contribute to that specific KR?
Right. So a related engineering department objective might be deliver 500 validated 8 MHz 8086 parts to the testing lab by May 30th.
Okay, feeding into the production goal.
And their key results would be even more granular. Things like develop final photomask artwork for the chip by April 5th, or deliver validated mask sets to the fabrication plant by April 9th. You see the chain.
Ah, yeah, totally. So the engineers' KRs deliver their team objective, which hits a corporate KR, which rolls up into the main company objective. Everyone's work is directly, visibly linked.
Exactly. The alignment and the speed were just incredible. Intel identified this existential threat, and within 2 weeks, they had fundamentally reoriented the entire company's plan and priorities. Motorola, their bigger competitor, just couldn't move that fast.
Was it all just dictated from the top down, though?
No, and that's key. The source really emphasizes the transparency aspect and the bottom-up contributions. While the main strategy came from leadership, because the OKRs were visible, people lower down could see the priorities and actually suggest improvements or contribute ideas. Like, someone might have an idea for running benchmark tests better, and the OKR system allowed that idea to be seen and incorporated.
So it sounds like it really broke down those silos you mentioned earlier.
Totally. That clear, shared priority, defined by the OKRs, created the sense of a greater good. The book talks about managers willingly giving up resources or focus from their own little fiefdoms because the overall company mission, made explicit by the OKRs, was so clear and urgent. It pulled everyone together: marketing, sales, engineering, manufacturing across different sites.
A true organizational effort. And the result, did they crush them?
They did. Operation Crush was a massive success. Intel fought off Motorola, regained market dominance, and that chip family, specifically the 8088 variant, ended up inside the very first IBM personal computer.
Wow, so it basically set the standard for the entire PC revolution.
Pretty much. And the book makes the strong claim: none of this would have happened without OKRs. It was the tool that allowed them to execute that complex strategy with such speed and alignment.
That story is incredibly powerful. Really shows OKRs as this execution engine, which leads us perfectly into what the book calls the superpowers of OKRs. The first one is all about focus and commitment.
Yeah, this is maybe the most fundamental superpower. OKRs force you to choose. They make an organization decide what matters most right now for this quarter, this year, whatever the cycle is, and then you have to commit your energy, your people, your resources to those specific things.
And the flip side of that commitment is saying no.
Right.
Exactly. By saying a clear yes to your top 3 of 5 priorities, you are implicitly and sometimes explicitly saying no to 100 other things that might seem important but aren't the most important.
That feels like one of the hardest things for any organization to do. There are always so many good ideas floating around.
Absolutely. That's why the principle of less is more is hammered home so much with OKRs. Andy Grove talked about it. Steve Jobs was famous for it. You have to limit the number of objectives the book suggests, 3 to 5 max per cycle, and limit the key results per objective, maybe 5 or fewer.
Because if you try to focus on 20 things,
You focus on nothing. It takes real discipline to boil it down. What is truly critical now?
and that discipline, that focus, it has to start right at the top, doesn't it?
Has to. Leadership commitment is absolutely non-negotiable for OKRs to work. Leaders can't just impose the system, they have to use it themselves. Set their own OKRs, talk about them, track their progress publicly.
Like that Bill Campbell quote.
Yeah, the legendary coach. If you don't model it, no one's going to do it. Simple as that. It has to be authentic, embodied by the leadership.
The book uses the story of Remind to illustrate this focus aspect really well, especially in a fast-growing startup context.
Right, Remind, the ed tech company. They built that simple, safe text messaging platform for teachers to communicate with parents and students.
And the founder, Brett Koff, was inspired by his own school experiences, right? Struggling with ADHD and dyslexia.
Exactly. He understood firsthand the power of focus, remembering a teacher who helped him by breaking tasks down. Plus, they saw the research showing how much positive impact that teacher-family communication has.
So great idea, clear need. But they struggled initially.
Like a lot of startups, yeah. The source says they had the vision, but initially lacked focus and didn't have good data. They were kind of fumbling in the dark, trying different things.
They needed that structure, that clarity OKRs provide.
Precisely. A big turning point was joining an accelerator, Imagine K-12. And Brett Kopp's very first kind of informal OKR was intense. Interview 200 teachers in 10 weeks.
Wow, that forces focus.
Totally. Forced him to just listen to customers, understand their real pain points, like teachers nervously using their personal phones, the liability issues. That deep insight directly shapes the product they built.
And the product took off like crazy, right? Scaled super fast.
Hockey stick growth, millions of users. But that kind of rapid scaling brings its own challenges, its own potential for chaos and losing focus.
So that's when they formally adopted OKRs.
Around the 6 million user mark, yeah. It helped them shift from relying on intuition to using data to set goals. They started tracking key metrics, weekly active teachers, monthly active teachers, retention rates. OKRs provided the structure.
And helped them navigate the complexity of that growth. Keep focused on what really drove value.
Exactly. It gave them a framework for making tough choices. There's an example in the book. Users were asking for a repeated message feature. Seemed like a reasonable request. But when they looked at their core OKRs around engagement and retention and the data, they realized building that feature, while nice, probably wouldn't move the needle significantly on their most important goals at that time. OKRs gave them the clarity and the justification to say, not right now, even to a popular request.
It helped them separate the nice-to-haves from the must-haves based on actual impact metrics.
Yes. And crucially, because the OKRs were transparent, everyone on the team understood why that decision was made. Brett said it took politics out of play. Priorities were clear, data-backed, visible to all.
And he even used OKRs himself to manage his own focus challenges.
He did. He intentionally limited his own personal OKRs, kept them visible to everyone, used them to guide his daily work. He was radically transparent, even sharing when he failed to hit a KR. That built trust and showed accountability.
So the result for Remind was better management, better execution, securing funding, and staying true to their core mission and users the teachers. Great example of focus.
Now, if Remind shows focus, the Nuna story really highlights the commitment side of this first superpower.
Muna, the healthcare data platform. Founded by Jeannie Kim, driven by that very personal mission from navigating the system for her brother.
Yeah, and Janine came from Google, so she already knew OKRs, knew their potential, but Nuna's early days, wow, A real struggle. The book says literally 2 years with no money, no customers, no orders, just trying to figure out the market, even crashing HR conferences to learn.
That's some serious persistence. And then they landed something huge.
Monumental, a massive government contract to build the first ever complete database for all Medicaid members. We're talking 74.5 million people. A wildly audacious goal, as the book puts it, something others had tried and failed to do.
Okay, that sounds incredibly complex. Huge technical challenge, massive responsibility. They'd need absolute focus and commitment.
Off the charts. They had to scale everything instantly. Compliance, security, build the tech infrastructure, grow the team from 15 to 75 people, and deliver this historic database in just 1 year, while still running their existing small business. Insane pressure.
So naturally, they turned to OKRs.
They did back in 2015. But, and this is really important, their first attempt failed.
Really? Why?
They underestimated the effort involved in actually implementing them properly. They kind of rolled them out company-wide too quickly without enough training or buy-in. Some people didn't bother setting them. Others just ignored them after setting them. It just didn't stick.
That's a critical lesson from the source, isn't it? That just knowing about OKRs isn't enough. The commitment piece is hard work.
It really is. Nuna learned that OKRs demand sustained effort, and that commitment has to come from the top. Leaders have to be relentless, especially when the goals are incredibly tough. The bigger the challenge, the more leaders need to model the behavior.
So what did they change for the second attempt?
Mid-2016, they tried again. But this time, they started small just with the leadership team, about 5 people. And Jenny Kim herself became like the chief OKR champion. Relentless follow-up emails, Slack messages, texts, stopping people in the hallway and making sure everyone was actually doing their OKRs.
Wow, that shows intense personal drive from the leader.
It absolutely does. And she didn't just push others, she modeled it powerfully. He shared her own individual OKRs publicly with the whole company.
What was the effect of that?
Huge. It showed vulnerability, accountability. It rallied the team because they could see exactly what her priorities were, and it actually invited people to give her constructive feedback on her goals.
Can you give an example of one of her public OKRs?
Sure. One objective was something like continue to build a world-class team. Her KRs were specific hiring goals. Recruit 10 engineers, hire a commercial sales leader. And she publicly graded herself on hitting those, like a 0.8 for the engineers, a 1.0 for the sales leader.
So showing progress, even if not perfect.
Exactly. She also had KRs about the process, like ensuring candidates had a great experience. She graded herself lower on that one, like a 0.5, openly showing, hey, we need to improve here. That kind of transparency is powerful.
She even used private OKRs, right?
Yeah, for sensitive things, like hiring a key VP that couldn't be public yet. She used a private OKR to keep herself focused and committed to that crucial task behind the scenes. Shows the flexibility as a tool for your commitment, public or private.
And what was the result of this renewed leader-led commitment at Nuna?
It forced the necessary conversations. It dramatically improved alignment as the team grew rapidly. According to the source, those seemingly impossible deadlines started feeling more attainable because everyone was pulling in the same direction, focused and committed.
And they delivered the Medicaid database.
They did. Successfully built that historic database. Now they're using those lessons in private healthcare. Still driven by Ginny's mission, inspired by her brother Kimong, who the company's named after. Her co-founder's quote is great. You won't get OKRs perfect at first. Just keep at it. Adapt the system. Persevere.
Incredible story. Shows commitment is just as crucial as focus, especially under pressure. Okay, that leads us to the second superpower. Align and connect for teamwork.
Right. This builds directly on that transparency we keep talking about. When OKRs are public and the book mentions companies where literally anyone can look up the CEO's OKRs.
Yeah, it still sounds pretty radical.
It is. But that openness is what aligns everyone. It connects individual work and team efforts directly to the company's overall mission in a way that's often missing. People can see how their piece fits into the bigger puzzle.
So transparency is really the foundation of this alignment superpower.
Absolutely. And the benefits are huge. The source points out how it helps meritocracy. You can see who's working on valuable stuff that moves the needle on important OKRs. It exposes duplication of effort pretty quickly, saving time and money.
And it reduces office politics.
Big time. The book calls things like suspicion and politicking organizational poisons. When objectives are clear, public, objective, in black and white, there's just less room for hidden agendas or fighting over turf. Priorities are out in the open.
And does seeing what other teams are working on help people collaborate better?
Naturally, if you can see that another team is struggling with a key result that impacts your own work or just contributes to a shared company goal, you're much more likely to proactively reach out and ask, hey, how can we help? It fosters teamwork and deepens those cross-functional relationships.
Okay, so transparency drives collaboration. But the core here is alignment, really making sure that what people do day to day actually contributes to the big picture, the company vision.
And this is a massive issue for most companies. The source throws out some shocking stats like studies finding only 7% of employees actually understand their company's strategy or how their work connects to it.
Only 7%. Wow.
Yeah, lack of alignment is consistently cited as one of the biggest barriers to actually executing strategy. OKRs tackle this head-on through what's called vertical alignment.
Meaning they explicitly link things up and down the org chart.
Exactly. They knit together individual goals, team goals, department goals, all the way up to the highest level company objectives, creating a clear line of sight.
The book uses that grand cascade idea, or the fantasy football analogy, right? The sandhill unicorns.
Ah, yeah, the sandhill unicorns. It's a good way to visualize how it works.
Walk us through it. How does the football analogy illustrate that cascade?
Okay, so at the very top, you've got the general manager. Their main objective, make money for the owner. Pretty clear.
Can't get much clearer than that for a business.
Right. And their key results to achieve that, maybe, win the Super Bowl and fill the stadium stands to 90% capacity. If they hit both those KRs, they've definitely achieved the objective of making money. It's a well-formed OKR.
Okay, makes sense at the top. How does that flow down?
So the head coach might report to the GM. The coach's objective could be win the Super Bowl, directly supporting the GM's KR. And their KRs might be things like achieve a top 5 defense ranking and average less than 2 turnovers per game.
Okay, coach's goals support the GM's goals. Keep going down.
Then you have, say, the defensive coordinator reporting to the coach, their objective, achieve a top 5 defense ranking supporting the coach's KR. And the DC's KRs might be allow fewer than 17 points per game and generate 3+ sacks per game.
I see the chain forming, down to the player level.
Yep. A defensive lineman reporting to the DC might have an objective, be a dominant pass rusher, and their KRs could be things like record 10+ sacks for the season and win 75% of one-on-one pass rush drills in practice.
Ah, okay. So the players' practice drill KR directly helps them get sacks, which helps the DC hit their sacks per game KR, which helps the coach achieve the top 5 defense KR, which helps the GM win the Super Bowl KR, which ultimately helps the GM make money for the owner. It all connects.
Exactly. That's the cascade. OKRs create that visible thread, connecting the daily work of an individual player or engineer or marketer all the way up to the organization's highest mission. Everyone can see how their effort contributes.
That's really powerful for motivation and ensuring effort isn't wasted. And the source mentions this isn't just for tech companies or football teams, right?
Not at all. It emphasizes the adaptability. OKRs are useful for tiny startups just trying to survive, for companies scaling rapidly who need a common language, and for huge enterprises trying to break down silos and empower people on the front lines.
And nonprofits, too.
Absolutely. The Gates Foundation uses them to tackle huge global health challenges, like fighting diseases. And there's the example of Sylvia Matthews Burwell using the OKR discipline in the U.S. government at OMB and then HHS to manage the complex response to the Ebola crisis.
So really versatile. The book also gets into some related ideas, like CFRs.
It does. CFRs, standing for conversation, feedback, and recognition, are presented as kind of the human side of OKRs, a system for continuous performance management that makes the goal setting more effective through regular dialogue, coaching, and acknowledging contributions. It also talks a lot about how OKRs shape company culture towards transparency, accountability, ambition.
But for this deep dive, we've really focused on drilling into the core mechanics of OKRs themselves and those key superpowers. Focus, commitment, alignment, and connection.
Exactly. The what, the why, and the how illustrated through those stories.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've seen how OKRs, this framework built on, well, seemingly simple objectives and measurable key results. It actually holds some profound power.
Yeah, power to cut through all that noise and complexity we started with. Power to drive real execution.
By bringing intense focus to what truly matters most.
By demanding unwavering commitment, especially from leaders.
By aligning everyone's efforts top to bottom towards the same big goals.
Then by connecting people and teams through transparency and shared purpose.
So the key takeaways seem pretty clear.
Yeah.
From the source material, Choose just a few vital priorities. Be ruthless about it.
Make the how truly measurable. Concrete key results. Get those numbers in there.
Embrace transparency. Let people see the goals, see the progress.
Get that leadership buy-in and modeling. It's non-negotiable.
And remember, OKRs aren't just about tracking numbers. They're a tool to spark conversations, foster collaboration, build connection.
Right. It's a management system, not just a measurement system.
So for you, listening to this, whether you're navigating your own complex projects, leading a team, or just trying to make sense of competing demands in your work or life, OKRs offer a path, a proven system.
A way to bring clarity to ambitious goals, to make sure your hard work actually translates into results you can see, and to understand how your contribution fits into the bigger picture. Those aha moments of connection.
And maybe one final thought to leave you with, kind of circling back to that John Doerr quote.
Ideas are easy. Execution is everything.
Right. So if execution truly is everything, and if knowing exactly what matters,
Knowing precisely how to measure if you're getting there,
and making sure everyone is pulling in the same direction,
if those are the keys to unlocking execution.
then the question is, how fundamentally could adopting a system like OKRs change your ability or your team's ability to achieve those really ambitious goals you have, whatever they might be? Something to think about.
Thanks for listening. Visit our library and subscribe below for more book summaries. This has been a Sprint Reads production.